Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. Today we're going to talk about collaborative practice with Dr. Susan Napolitano and Mr. John McDaniel, both with a collaborative process. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What is collaborative process?
Well, let me start by trying to explain it in simple terms. Collaborative process is one of the 4 ways that parties can go through the divorce process. And collaborative is unique in the way that, in the sense that the parties who use a collaborative process are engaging a team of professionals that from the legal, mental health, and financial professions to help them solve their divorce issues outside of the courthouse so they can customize their own solutions without having to turn over control of the outcome to a judge or another third party.
We're talking about 2 spouses in a room with each other and 4 or 5 other people, or walk us through what the actual room looks like.
Well, when you have a collaborative meeting, you're in usually an attorney's office conference room, and the professional team usually consists of an attorney for each party. Let me take a little aside here, because unlike the typical court representation process, in collaborative, the lawyers that are used cannot go to court and advocate as an adversary for their client. They enter into this process with a commitment from the parties that the lawyers can only work in the negotiation process, in the collaborative process. So the lawyers have a unique role there. In addition to that, it's also unique to collaborative is that we use mental health professionals such as Dr. Napolitano, who work either as child specialists to work with the children, or more commonly as divorce coaches to help the parties deal with the emotional issues, and she'll speak more about that. The other team members we add as necessary or as appropriate to the case would include financial professionals to work as neutrals to help the parties assemble their financial information and analyze it and brainstorm scenarios for settlement.
In this, you also have someone that deals with finances. What's that person's role?
Well, the financial specialist is usually an accountant or certified divorce financial analyst or divorce planner. They help people gather together the financial information, which can become quite complicated. And they also help them prepare their financial disclosure declarations, which are required by law. And they also, probably more importantly, help the parties brainstorm options about how they're going to allocate their property, how they're going to allocate their ongoing funding, their cash resources and income to support 2 households after you separate them.
Dr. Napolitano, I want to ask you about divorce, and question 1, are we seeing a lot of divorce now in our society? And question 2, the impact of divorce on the children.
You know, we're seeing a lot of divorce in our society and all around the world. It seems to be increasing as time goes on. Couples seem to not have the mental health or day-to-day resources to keep their marriages and families together. Although it's become commonplace and many children have to deal with the adjustments of a divorce, from the eyes of a child, it's almost invariably a devastating experience to have the family that they've relied upon break apart. In general, just breaking apart is difficult, and then if they break apart with a great deal of conflict, or if that conflict is stirred up even more by an adversarial litigation process, there's just no question that it becomes more and more stressful and at times even traumatic for the children.
When you're in the room with 2 spouses, are they, at that point, are they still fighting with each other? I mean, in your perspective, walk us through what the feeling is of the 2 spouses.
My experience with all contentious divorce and the vast majority of our collaborative cases is that the couples are still fighting together with using whatever style of conflict management they have. Some couples are silent, angry people, and some are very loud, angry people, and they're going to bring that conflict management style to the collaborative process. It's going to show up in the meetings. It's going to often show up in how they treat each other, and more importantly, it could significantly interfere with their capacity to gather the information they need for their divorce or to come up with a settlement they can both live with. The anger is a part of the process. The pain is a part of the process. And what we do in collaborative divorce that doesn't happen very much in other settings is we understand that, and we try to use our team to deal with that effectively and help them through their anger and emotions so that they can use the more rational part of their brain to sort out the issues that the law requires they sort out.
At times, is it tough for you as the expert in the room when there is that pain and you see someone in tears?
You know, that's always my signal to get busy. After all these years, it's not so much hard. It makes me and the mental health professionals sort of zone in, be present, be supportive, and then use our therapy type skills to coach them through the emotional turmoil that could bubble up at any moment and get them back on track.
Mr. McDaniel, I want to ask you about how this collaborative practice even started, and how did it come to Fresno?
Well, it actually started by a single person, a lawyer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Stu Webb. About 1990, he came to the conclusion that taking families through the court process, the divorce process, the traditional litigation mode was just too damaging, too injurious to the families, particularly the kids. Mm-hmm. And he decided at that time he was no longer going to represent parties unless they were willing to settle out of court, and made a career decision at that point. If parties, his client, could not settle out of court, then they would have to hire other counsel to go forward. So that was the start of collaborative. Got a group of people together in Minnesota, and they started to develop the collaborative process, and somehow, I'm not quite sure how, but it leapfrogged to the peninsula, California, the Bay Area, and I think San Mateo. And people heard about it, and a group of lawyers in that area a few years later thought that was a really good idea. So they started to develop this concept of collaborative, which means that the lawyers cannot go to court, and other people would have to take over if the parties were unable to negotiate a settlement. Parallel to that, there was a movement in the mental health community to try to develop resources for divorcing couples to help them manage the emotional turmoil of divorce, as Dr. Napolitano has been talking about. And just coincidentally, these were running along parallel tracks, and I assume at some point somebody had a cup of coffee or met at happy hour, had this discussion, and thought, you know, maybe we could merge these two concepts. An out-of-court resolution process with the help of mental health professionals to make it safer for people to sit in a room and talk together, to help the people who don't have a voice gain a voice, and to help those people who are too overbearing, too intimidating, to calm down and focus and become more rational. So that's where the idea of a collaborative team began to develop in the early 90s. It grew in Northern California, spread to Southern California. Interestingly, it took off like wildfire in Texas.
Interesting.
The reason how it started in Texas was really top down. The judges were interested in it. Ah. So they started a statewide organization in Texas that got hold, and it became very popular at the impetus of the courts. In California, it grew really from the legal community to the mental health community. It's now spread to over 24 countries. International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the international organization, has members in 24 countries around the world and has over 4,000 members. So it's been growing considerably since its start with one person.
Wow, incredible. Dr. Napolitano, talk about the different types of divorce or the different levels of divorce?
Well, some of the different levels can be from low conflict to high conflict. The lower the conflict is, the better it's going to be for all family members, especially the children. The arena of litigation and even collaborative practice is probably more related to the families that are having the higher conflict. They're going to need the help, they're going to need the support. And really what it seems to break down to a lot is this particular family that's having some conflicts that they're having a hard time managing. Are the conflicts so big that there's no other way to resolve their conflict other than to jump into the adversarial process of the court system and have a judge decide? Or are the conflicts so big that with the proper team of people who don't want to fight, who don't want to make more money by inflaming the other person's anger, can we create a team for you people to help you manage your conflict, manage your difficulties, manage your old pains in such a way that we can help you decide what your outcome is and not end up in that very last day where you've made your case, you've let everyone know as well as you can how terrible the other person is, and you wait with bated breath for a judge to decide what happens with your finances and, more importantly, what happens with your children. That's the piece that really makes collaborative compelling, because when it comes down to it, even if you are dealing with a lot of conflict and pain, do you really want somebody else to make decisions about where your kids are going to spend time? And in collaborative, what we can offer clients is that in spite of all of your difficulties and challenges, in spite of your conflict, we are going to do our best to work together to provide a process where ultimately you two will make that decision in the end about what happens with your property, but more importantly, what happens with your children. This
sounds like mediation in some ways, but it doesn't in other ways. Can you describe a little bit mediation and what the difference is between this and mediation?
Okay. Well, collaborative really grew out of mediation. Stu Webb, I mentioned earlier, had mediation background. Part of the impetus for collaborative was a sense that mediation was very useful for a lot of people, but other people needed more help. When you use a mediator, it's a voluntary process, like collaborative. Nobody can be forced into it. In fact, nobody should be pushed into these. They should carefully think about these options. But mediation typically involves the use of a single mediator who works with the couple. It doesn't have that team element that collaborative does. And also, it does not typically have that availability of ongoing legal advice, legal guidance from that collaborative attorney that you would in the collaborative process. So it was felt that mediation, while it works really well for a lot of people, it doesn't work well where there's big power imbalances between the parties, where there's a domineering spouse and there's a quiet, shy, intimidated, easily intimidated spouse, or where they really need a lot of ongoing advice and guidance from the legal aspects and also the financial aspects.
We keep mentioning team, and I love that, the team. How is the team selected, and do both parties have a say? Let's say I'm going through this process and I want you, but my ex-spouse wants you. How does that work? I mean, do we both have to agree?
Everybody has to agree on everything in collaborative. Yeah. It's client-centered. The clients are going to make the ultimate decision. So each party, typically in our area, it comes through the legal portal. A party will go see a lawyer who practices collaborative law and talk to them about their divorce options, whether collaborative is suitable. And if they decide it is, then they may discuss that with their spouse, who would go to another collaborative attorney. And then if both are in agreement, typically what happens next is that the two attorneys will discuss their respective clients and their perceptions of their needs and make recommendations about who would be a good fit for them in terms of a divorce coach. Sometimes there's really no sense where there may be a good choice for a coach, so we direct the prospective client to our collaborative practice group, and they may review the roster, interview coaches, and make their own decision. But ultimately, it's going to be the client's choice. We want them to be working with someone they're comfortable with.
A divorce coach, it sounds interesting. What is a divorce coach?
I love the concept of coaching. As a psychologist, one piece of my practice has been providing psychotherapy for people. Psychotherapy is based on a model that somebody has an illness, some sort of mental illness, and you use your tools and skills to help them recover. Coaching is an entirely different animal. Coaching is not based on an illness model. Coaching looks at individual people in conjunction with their circumstances, sees what impedes with them moving forward, sees what their difficulties are in coming to agreements regarding this divorce, and uses one's therapeutic skills to coach them through the process. So for me, it's been really fun to look at people through a different lens. As hard as it is for them, it's been nice change for me, because I'm not looking at it through an illness lens. I'm looking at it through these are very difficult life circumstances. So although I might be using some therapeutic tools to help people feel understood and validated around their emotions, my job is really coaching and pushing them forward, teaching them what the next step is, helping prepare them to be emotionally ready for the next step, and oftentimes keeping their emotional issues contained so that they can behave in a civil and productive manner when we have our meetings and we kick through step by step of going through a divorce. It's coaching, it's not therapy.
Do you see that people underestimate how much work is involved in divorce? I imagine there's people out there who simply think that it's divorce, I'll sign the papers, and we're done. Can you address that?
You know, a lot of people walk in very preoccupied with their emotions about what went wrong in the marriage. There could be an affair, they could believe the other parent's a terrible parent, they're often terrified of what's going to happen financially or with the children. And so I find that most people begin the divorce process very preoccupied with those issues, which often are not particularly, they're not as relevant as they would think they are. And then in any divorce, all these other people are going to say, well, yeah, that's nice, but you got to look at this. You got to get your disclosures. You got to figure out what your finances are. You have to do X, Y, and Z. And I find a lot of people not only aren't particularly interested in those details, they don't understand them because they're so overwhelmed by the emotions about these family problems that they had that they don't even know what we're talking about when we're talking about numbers and cut and dry categories and steps that they have to go through to get a divorce. My good friend John McDaniel told me, and this was very insightful, we find ourselves having to repeat ourselves a lot to people going through a divorce. You say something, and then 20 minutes later, they say something that suggests that they have no idea what you just said. And you go, I told them that, I explained that. And what John had explained to me, the non-mental health professional, people are so overwhelmed in a divorce that they probably retain only 10% of what they're being told.
That's incredible.
It's absolutely incredible, and I playfully remind myself of that on a regular basis to keep me patient and calm and centered when I find that I'm often having to say the same thing over and over again. And I think the people really appreciate that we take time to help them with that because they don't understand. I'm just learning myself.
John, talk about a group of affiliates. Talk about what that is.
Okay. Well, collaborative practice is supported really by practice groups. Here in Fresno, Central Valley, we have Central Valley Collaborative Law Affiliates, which started about 10 years ago. And the goal of that organization is to promote and educate the public about the collaborative process, but also to enhance our practice skills as collaborative practitioners. Because we have so many moving parts in our collaborative work, we work with mental health people, and lawyers have no understanding of what mental health people do until they start working with them in a collaborative context. Mental health people don't know what lawyers do, and None of us
know what the accountants do.
Yeah, none of us know what the financials do. So we do a lot of networking. We do a lot of education of each other's in each other's disciplines, and also work on how we can work healthily with a team, particularly in a couple that's hard to manage, difficult to manage, how we can manage those people. So we do a lot of training, we do a lot of education and self-education in that process.
If I understand you two correctly, there's no judge involved in this process, correct?
Well, there will be a judge involved at the very end when they sign the settlement documents, and that's it.
But no, there's no judge, there's not even a referee, and sometimes we could use one, but we manage.
So the binding part is at the end then, after the agreements are made, then it goes before a judge?
It just goes to the court to be signed and filed. The judgment or marital settlement agreement that results from the collaborative settlement is entitled to as much dignity and power and enforceability as one that's the result of a long-fought court process. So it will be signed by the judge at the end. The parties will move on to the next stage of their lives, hopefully in a healthier manner than they would be if they'd gone through the litigation process.
That's pretty much the only time that our work ends up in the courthouse, and it's important to have that seal of the judge. But what families don't have to deal with is having a judge decide for them, sitting in court hallways for hours and hours and hours, waiting for the calendar to call their case. And they have much less of that experience of no one heard how I feel about this. Because although they might spend a lot of time attacking each other in a litigation process, they might do that. Those issues often just aren't really relevant, and people usually walk away feeling like nobody cared about the issues that are most important to them. We try our best to keep people focused and moving forward, but also give them some room to know that their important emotional experience was heard and considered as we negotiated toward a final outcome.
Do you find that sometimes after this process, the couples want to stay together instead of divorce?
You know, I haven't seen them decide to stay together, but I have seen in moments of relaxation and comfort with the team them make comments such as, if we had learned these tools during our marriage that we now use in the collaborative process, we may have stayed married.
I've seen a significant difference in a lot of the people who come out of the collaborative process. They have a greater ability to communicate with each other. They still have that collaborative team there should there be problems in the future that need adjustment. Support arrangements, the parenting plan, they may need to be looked at again down the road, and they still have the comfort of the assurance that that collaborative team will be there to help them again. But mostly I've seen them, they don't need us nearly as much as the people who go through the traditional divorce, who are still much more angry at each other.
I want to go back and ask you about how someone gets enrolled in this process, because you know, if I'm going through a divorce, I'm going to go to a lawyer, but how do I know that this option is available?
Well, there are a number of ways of finding out. This program's one, hopefully. Our group has a monthly workshop called Divorce Options, which we sponsor. It's the second Saturday of each month at the Ramada Inn from 9 to 1 o'clock. We have a full collaborative team there, 2 lawyers, a financial and a mental health professional, that will talk about the divorce options so people can find out what's mediation like, what's collaborative like, what's litigation like, what's it like to do it across a kitchen table. And also we'll talk to them about the actual procedures of divorce, the financial issues they're going to have to take a look at, how to gather the information that you'll need for the court process, regardless of which choice you take. The mental health professional also talks about the emotional challenges of divorce, how to talk to the kids about getting divorced. So that's an excellent place to start.
There are a number of people involved, the experts in this process. Where are the meetings? you mentioned kitchen table, but is that where this is happening, or is it in one of your offices?
Yeah, there's something about our meetings that I'm particularly proud of. And it's a much more comfortable environment than the courthouse. Meetings are typically held in a conference room at one of the attorney's offices. Once they've selected their attorneys and selected their coaches, there is a meeting that's scheduled, often a preliminary meeting. We've often talked behind the scenes to choreograph what to expect and to help the clients be prepared. But let's say John and I are working as a team on a case. We may decide that because his client is more vulnerable, the best place to have the first meeting would be in his office where his client has already been. We often will go in the room with the client beforehand, especially a particularly anxious one, and help them design the seating arrangement. I've had clients that say, I cannot sit in this room across from him. I can't do it. So we will then negotiate or rearrange. You can sit here, what if they sit there? So sometimes, even before they walk into the room, they know where they're going to sit, where the other team members are going to sit, and how far they're going to be from their spouse. Because they're gearing up to decide, can I even look at them? Can I even look across the room without all my anger bubbling up? And that's where they lean on the coach for that. The other thing that's really nice about our meetings that are conducted in a fairly natural, comfortable environment is we serve food. And the food really sends a message. It says, we're here as human beings. And we know that people eat, and we're going to nurture you. We're not here to tear you up. Now, usually in the first meetings, it's only the professionals who are grabbing at the grapes. But it's a good sign for us, and we know that things are moving in a safe and productive direction when you see that client reach out and grab a cookie. Because if a client can sit and eat something in that meeting, that means that their nervous system, hyperarousal systems have calmed down to the point where they can eat, and that means they can now think. If you can eat, you can think. If you're so revved up that you can't think, you probably can't eat either. And then we'll often alternate so that the next meeting, which we'll schedule in advance, will take place at the other attorney's office to give that sense of balance, ideally for both parties. And the attorneys come up with the money and take care of the beverages and the food for the clients. And I think it's a nice touch and very different from a courtroom.
If our audience has any questions, how can they get a hold of either of you or learn more?
Quickest way to do this would be to go to our group's website. It's at divorcefresno.net. And there's a list of all the practitioners there if they want to contact someone specifically, or go to our divorce options workshop.
On that note, you have been watching and listening San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs production of CMAC Fresno and KFSR 90.7 FM. Today we had Dr. Susan Napolitano. She is a doctor. We also have John McDaniel. He's an attorney. Thank you for tuning in this week on the program. Thank you to the crew and everybody who made this possible. My name is Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week for a new edition.